And this seems like an appropriate moment to introduce our speaker, who is Dr. Maya Ward. And she has made a very big contribution in her life up to now, really, in looking at some of these issues concerned with environment, Indigenous peoples, community, belonging, and has written a book some years ago, was it 2012, Mayor? 11. Called The Comfort of Water, which is here tonight and is available for purchase. I read this book and I'm rereading it again, and I can tell you it has not dated. It is very alive, very current, very relevant now. And those of you who are coming to the workshop on Sunday will, I think, have a wonderful experience. My Mayor is going to talk to us along the way. This is an extremely well-written book. It is so interesting. David Tacey described it as a story of historical, cultural, and environmental significance, told in shimmering prose. So that's praise indeed from David. Maya was Maya, apologies, I'll get it right. Maya was born in and has lived most of her life in the Yarra River country, so she knows it well. She very much enjoys exploring this wonderful place. She didn't actually mean to become a writer, which I found quite fascinating when I read that, but she walked the length of the Yarra from the sea to the source, an experience that she felt she had to share, and she caught the writing bug in doing that. Maya understands the power of the natural world to transform lives and writes about the connection between a river and the self with humility, humour, and a clear-headed wisdom. Through trekking the Wurundjeri songline, this ancient, ever-renewing river, she discovers rich possibilities of belonging and shares how a river can nourish the passion and resilience required to transform the world. So, now I should do a little bio thing. Her PhD is in creative writing, but she studied as an urban designer, I think an architect and a landscape architect, permaculture teacher, and a bushland revegetator. She has a master's in applied science, so social ecology, and I've missed out something here. She's worked as a community arts sector as a festival director, a musician, a composer, and was a founding placemaker at one of Australia's leading placemaking films, Village Well. I don't know what that is, but perhaps you may tell us. So would you please welcome Maya?
Thank you. Hello. How's the volume? Good. I feel honoured to begin tonight by acknowledging country, Wurundjeri Country, and to take this opportunity to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Yet in many ways, this whole presentation will be an acknowledgement of country. Country, as you may know from the work of one of our elders, David Tacey, is a special word in Aboriginal English, and it means not only the land, but the whole interlinked system of all beings thriving in a place, including humans and the stories they tell and retell, stories not necessarily seen as created by humans. And that's a very important point that we'll come back to. So this is a very new ritual, this ritual of acknowledgement that we're seeing at the start of public gatherings in Australia. And I don't think it needs to be a set template. I don't think it's words that we can then not really hear, because I do feel there's an invitation in them to live deeply into the present moment of this place, these people, and our shared and our unshared histories. To experience the wise lessons our body seeks to tell us through the emotions, the shame or grief, or perhaps the aversion or the relief that arise when we hear those words. To allow ourselves to feel them and to find the openness and possibility that lie on the other side of the experience of feeling. My work has included a long, slow grappling with these emotions, and it continues to be a profound and fruitful learning journey. So thank you for the opportunity to join with you here in a Jungian field of meaning. I am hoping, in a small way, we may walk toward the archetypal world together. The archetype Jung himself embodies would be, for us, perhaps the wise elder, the sage. So, standing here in his name, is this an invitation to enter that archetype? I may not be able to do that, but I will be speaking tonight of a number of extraordinary elders and speaking their words, and in the process, perhaps calling into the room that field of wisdom. Sean Cain, in his book Wisdom of the Myth-Tellers, writes, "We live in the interplay of two modes of knowing, one chattering like a monkey, yet powerless to mean, the other meaningful as a sunset, yet powerless to name." But let's see if you and I can make a bridge so we can walk together between the modes of knowing. May we be guided by elders across the bridge they have made between the worlds. Through most of human history, our myth lives cohered through living a shared place. The Yarra, long known as Birrarung, river of mists, has been a wisdom holder for countless generations. Birrarung, flowing not far from here, continues in every moment to offer us this invitation. Tonight, I will present something of how I have sought to be loyal to what the river has taught me, and how I seek to share meaning in these confused and confusing times. I'll begin by reading from my book, The Comfort of Water. The idea of a pilgrimage for the Yarra sailed into my mind one day, threw a rope and tied it securely to my heart. I'd never heard of anyone doing such a thing. There was no official path, yet this outlandish notion seemed at once utterly obvious and completely necessary. The notion of walking the length of the Yarra grew, I think, from my quest to live with clarity and sanity in the place I call home. To that end, I'd been learning about bioregionalism. From bio, life, and region, place, these are philosophies and practices of living within local ecological limits. Bioregional writers encourage practical action, explore and learn about where you live, and let that knowledge guide your behaviour. Boundaries of bioregions are often drawn around river catchments, yet rivers play another role, a metaphoric one. Rivers are a symbol of the philosophy, as the river's very nature tells of our interconnection and responsibilities to each other. We are all dependent on the health of the water in our rivers. Yet that water is so vulnerable. All that is discarded on the streets or spread through the paddocks, the rubbish and the effluent of a society, eventually washes into a river. The river is our witness. The river carries everything right through the heart of the city. Knowledge of place was once foundational. People lived more locally and over a lifetime rarely ventured far from home. Nowadays, many of us live much of our each day inside the screen worlds of television or the internet, inside the pages of books, inside windowless warehouses, shopping centres or office complexes. Travel too is usually inside cars, trains and planes, where the particularities of the ground and the air are lost. Bioregionalism is about reclaiming what we have only just lost, an innate and inescapable sense of place. Writers in the field talk about knowing the boundaries of home in geographical rather than political terms, and almost all of Greater Melbourne lay in the Yarra River bioregion. The almost new culture and form of Melbourne did not emerge organically from this old land. We have here a colonial heart and ever-expanding rings of American-inspired, car-dominated suburbs. But there are cracks in the grid. The winding Yarra and her tributaries fracture the rigid forms, force accommodations. In these gaps, the wild clings on in the city. These places I loved, yet I knew so little about them. With inadequate tools to understand my surroundings, a sense of displacement and an ache to belong gnawed at me. In my process of searching for a way to sink deeper into my home place, I was often drawn to tales of pilgrimage. These journeys took place in other lands, often ambitious, often long, usually walked. They were undertaken by those seeking connection with something larger than themselves. The pilgrim was a seeker. These seekers sought that which is only revealed over time, through devotion to the task, through mental and physical effort. The period of pilgrimage was an immersion, a concentration of heart, thought and intention, a preparation for a long-awaited meeting. Devotion bears fruit when finally the pilgrim arrives at the destination. Yet, like listening to a story, there's no use in only knowing the ending. The journey, the whole story, is needed for the ending to make sense. And every step on the path is a word in the pilgrim's story. There are ancient cultural rituals of walking pilgrimages to holy places in many cultures, including the Buddhist, Christian and Hindu traditions. Yet sacred walking resonated with what I'd heard of Aboriginal connections to land. The seasonal practices of hunting and gathering meant lifetimes journeying over country along sung lines. These two different traditions, religions originating overseas and local ancient practices, neither tradition was mine. But for me to go on a pilgrimage in Australia with all of this history in mind felt like bringing them into some sort of conversation. I was interested in what, if I listened carefully, I might overhear. There has finally arrived a sense that we must stop affecting the earth in the way that we do. The calls to change how we source our material needs are growing ever louder. Yet while society is slowly acknowledging the truth of this, there also seems to be a corresponding simplification and smoothing over the depths contained in these challenges. And it is as if change were an external thing, with all the holes in the web of the world fixed with a few new laws and a switch to green buying. as if nothing needed to change on the inside. I feel the problems are far deeper than our culture seems ready to admit. I'd grown up in a family of environmental and social activists. I'd known about issues of climate change from my youngest days. So I kept thinking that awareness and action were surely imminent. But in the intervening decades, despite growing awareness, we've gone backwards. Growing up, I struggled to communicate what I knew of the dire news. Yet I saw bewilderment and dismissal in the faces of those around me. I'd often rail against the unfairness of knowing when so many around me seemed at peace with the way things were. I have come now to see it as both a gift and a duty, understanding that there was never a choice but to work for change. Knowing has given me purpose, commitment and clarity. There is great work to be done all over the world. How is it to be done here, now? In truth, the challenges are so huge that for us to adequately come to grips with them, they must enwrap our entire minds. What does change look like, feel like? How is change to be lived? How are we changed in the process? Our actions come out of who we are, how we think, what we treasure, and what we fear. I feel that all of this must be explored if we are to know how to be and how to behave in this time. And I feel we must start with the land. Where exactly do we find ourselves? The Yarra was the site of first meeting between the whites and the Wurundjeri. It is still contested ground. The almost new city of Melbourne is where it is because of this river. What, I wondered, did the old river know? I sensed that walking the river would help me. In a time when the web that holds together the world I love is unravelling, I hoped a pilgrimage along my river would give me courage. I wrote that 10 years ago or so, but it still feels so very, very relevant to this tricky time that we find ourselves in. And I feel far less alone in my knowing, for better or worse. I'll continue with a little bit from further on in the book. And I'll read this. I remembered what Ian Hunter, the Wurundjeri elder whom I had worked with for many years at Ceres Community Environment Park, had said to me a few days before we set out. The way along the river is a songline. A songline is a path of the dreaming, a narrative of the ancestors which mapped the land in song. I imagined how stories would be alive in places all along the way, days and days of walking and chanting, woven together into neural pathways, the brain grooved to the shape of the land, paths of mind, heart and country, traversed over a lifetime, stories passed down the generations, regenerating each time the song was sung. The ancestors, the people, the land, becoming one thing, enchanted through chant, grown together through song, and each singing made them anew. The singing of hills, now flattened, bends, straightened, billabongs, drained. To imagine such a web of meaning once alive in this place, to have read of its dismemberment and its forgetting, yet to be stepping out on a fine morning with the wind and the words of kind people, was to be emptied and filled, blown clear through, free and indebted, and with the chance to be true. May I breathe through my feet, lay my skin open, and be there to meet it all that is left and all that is new. And thus we began our pilgrimage. So that 3-week journey was the strangest, most powerful experience of my life. Excuse me, fiddling with my ear. One that I felt a huge responsibility to share. Writing the comfort of water compounded and deepened the strangeness, as the writing process seemed to partake in the mysteries that accompanied the walk. It took 7 years, yet at the completion of this writing process, I was still confused and I was still overwhelmed. Questions remained regarding the particular quality of my connection to place and how this spilled over into the relationship between the place and the writing of my experience. So, next, I undertook a PhD in creative writing to see if I could come to more solid ground with the experience. Well, I finished that PhD last year, and I think I have. I feel grateful to have discovered a rich stream of scholarship that does help explain, but doesn't diminish the mystery. My research has enabled me to contextualise my experience and to locate similar sentiments within the history of Western thought. At the same time, I have investigated contemporary understandings of embodied experience. I explore the role of embodiment in enhancing our sensory awareness, and in turn, how enhanced sensory awareness can lead to an experience of profound interrelatedness, a deep sense of being inextricably part of all things. Because the walk was a walk. It was something the body did, and that, it took me a long time, was the most important thing. Because we cannot, with our cognitive mind, understand the fullness of our biological nature. Our neocortex, this little bit at the frontier, does not hold an awareness of the multitude of functions that the body does. Breathing, digesting, releasing an egg into womb. Our bodies are mysterious to us. Yet we can consciously engage with our unconscious by an action such as watching the breath, as is done in meditation. We observe our organism gently and patiently. We witness its complexity. We sit with its mystery. And then, sometimes, a shift happens and a wholly different awareness takes over. Wholeness is aware of itself. Wholeness is being itself. I want to share a quote from Jung here. The creative process, we might have been wondering if I'd ever get to Jung. The creative process has a feminine quality, and the creative work arises from unconscious depths. We might truly say from the realm of the mothers. Whenever the creative force predominates, life is ruled and shaped by the unconscious rather than by the conscious will, and the ego is swept along on an underground current, becoming nothing more than a helpless observer of events. The progress of the work becomes the poet's fate and determines his psychology. It is not Goethe that creates Faust, but Faust, that creates Goethe. From what I can gather in my research, it seems the family myth of Carl Jung being Goethe's great-grandson had a profound influence on him, while at the same time he seemed annoyed with himself for being seduced by the literalism of this unlikely scenario. Jung references Goethe's Faust frequently. Like many of his time, Jung was profoundly influenced by Goethe's writing. Yet Goethe dismissed the importance of his literature and sought to bring awareness to what he most valued, his scientific method. I contend, and this is some of my research from my PhD, is that Goethe's science was key to his ability to write literature, to his ability to understand life. Discovering Goethe's science was pivotal in helping me explain and contextualise my experience of walking the river and the archetypal world generally. So, Goethe's not so well known in Australia. Possibly more people know Steiner, who spent 10 years, the first 10 years of his working life, from when he was 20 to 30, editing Goethe's scientific works. In fact, the first person who thoroughly read them. He then went on and started a system of schooling, a system of agriculture, a system of health sciences, profound architecture, and on and on and on, after he had digested Goethe's method. It's quite interesting to me. Stephen Booner's Plant Intelligence and the Imaginal Realm, which came out in 2014, a text grounded in Goethean science, has been foundational for me. It's explained much of my experience, and it also respectfully supports and validates many Indigenous ways of knowing. It speaks of how to widen sense perception, and it explains cultural strictures against doing so. It explicates extraordinary similarities between human, animal, and plant physiologies. We are so similar to plants. And it celebrates the vibratory nature of all living things. The songs, it could be said, of the various forms of life. The soft earth music some sensitive or well-trained folk can hear. I'm just at the beginning of learning this Goethean method, but I'm committed to a thorough investigation of it, which is important, it seems, as described here by David Seaman. Because accurate looking and seeing are crucial in Goethe's way of study, he stresses the importance of training and education. He believes that observers are not all equal in their ability to see. Each person must develop his or her perceptual powers through effort, practice, and perseverance. Yet Goethe argued that it is not enough to train only the outer senses and the intellect. He maintained that as a person's abilities to see outwardly improve, so do his or her inner recognitions and perceptions become more sensitive. As one learns to see more clearly, he or she also learns to see more deeply. One becomes more at home with the phenomenon, understanding it with greater empathy, concern, and respect. Just reading that now helps me. I'm thinking about Jung and how his method of deeply attending to his own wildness, his own unconscious wildness, unconsciousness, we could call them the same thing, developed in him his capacity to see deeply. And I feel like, from what I've understood of learning about Goethe, His method started out there with his extraordinary curiosity. He was an amazingly curious human being who studied things so deeply. And as he studied the outer world, he started to understand his inner world. Jung, from my understanding, may have started with the wildness of the patient, the wildness of his own self, the wildness of humans. But both of them are talking about the wildness of life. Goethe called his process of subtle, attentive observation exact sensorial imagination. According to him, this delicate empiricism, which is a lovely phrase, was necessary in order to truly understand the nature of living things. Delicate empiricism was prolonged, empathetic looking and seeing grounded in direct experience. Such observation would enable the capacity to see from the whole. Imagination, in the way that Goethe means, is not something made up. Rather, it is specific information gained through close attention, yet not visible to the normal way of looking. And again, it makes me think of Jung and the patient and the time, the deep amount of time that is spent in that healing journey of being with the fullness of another body in this prolonged empathic observing. So there's a quote here from Henry Bortoft, an extraordinary philosopher who studied Goethe's work very deeply. Goethe's way of seeing is not concerned with providing an alternative explanation of phenomena, but with an alternative to explanation. I love that. This alternative is the seeing which is twofold, where the different parts and the wholeness or unity of these parts are simultaneously present together. We are involved in a double way, simultaneously through the organ of sensory sight and the organ of imagination. Writing about this method, even when one is as clear as Bortoft, is difficult, because without experiencing this perception shift, it doesn't make much sense. I don't know how you are all going with what I'm saying, but it doesn't, for me, make much sense to talk about it abstractly. The clearest example I've yet found to demonstrate this point is the following anecdote from Peter Sengi's book, Presencing. The inventor Buckminster Fuller was fond of holding up his hand and asking people, "What is this?" He would point out that the cells that make up that hand were continually dying and regenerating themselves. What seems tangible is continually changing. What you see is not a hand, said Fuller. It is pattern integrity. The universe's capacity to create hands. For Fuller, this pattern integrity was the whole, of which each particular hand is a concrete manifestation. When I read that, I got archetypes. That's my understanding of it. It's the pattern behind the thing that is a felt sense, and it is turning the perception from almost from the foreground, if I could say that I'm the foreground, to the background, which is the universe that manifests me. So it's this sensory, physical, embodied, spiritual shift that bang, the whole is there. And there are these beings inside the pattern. Our contemporary understanding of biology here helps us to see beyond the surface. Seeing becomes seeing into. This transformation of seeing can be a startling experience in itself, but it's what can happen next that makes for the real head trip. The research, I'm so excited by this stuff still. The researcher in directing, so this is another quote from Bortoft, the researcher in directing attention exclusively to the phenomenon is in fact surrendering to the phenomenon. This is so important. Because by doing so, you make a space for it to appear as itself. So my body is feeling that, what I just said. It's going, yes! It's like you see me. It's like my body is saying, yes, you're seeing things clearer. This provides the condition of the reversal of will to happen from active to receptive will, whereupon it is the organising principle of the phenomenon itself which can come to an expression in the researcher's thinking. This is me again. The shift in consciousness, the feeling of the phenomenon, and here I'll say, with the river being alive and intelligent and inside my thinking, with me, with mind, it is no exaggeration to say it completely changed my world. And it's because that happened that I spent 7 years trying to work out how to say it. And I got to the end and I went, I still don't understand it. I got to the end of the PhD, I feel like I understand this now. And, a number of you are older than me. You probably get it too. And anyway, it's exciting stuff when you get that. Heidegger, who I've come to love through this whole process, writes, "The world picture did not change from an earlier one into a modern one, but rather the fact that the world became picture at all is what distinguishes the essence of the modern age." So, what he's saying is that not so long ago we saw deeper. And when I properly listen to Indigenous people, I feel that is absolutely true, and I feel that that's what they're trying to say. And so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about something called Dadirri. James and I shared a beautiful experience over this. I want to introduce to you, some of you may already know, the work of Aboriginal Australia's Miriam Rose Unguma, a Daly River woman of the Nangkurungkung tribe. She writes of and teaches Dadirri, deep listening. I am delighted by the parallels I observe between Dadirri and Goethe's exact sensorial imagining. Both of them are techniques of enhanced perception that enable the aliveness of all beings to be experienced, and both of them tending to a synesthetic perception, where seeing is hearing, is primarily feeling. It's the body, the entire organism, registering perception. Unguma describes Dadirri in this way. It is perhaps the greatest gift we can give to our fellow Australians. In our language, this quality is called Dadirri. It is inner deep listening and quiet, still awareness. Dadirri recognises the deep spring that is inside us. I like her metaphor. We call on it and it calls to us. This is the gift that Australia is thirsting for. It is something like what you call contemplation. When I experience Dadirri, I am made whole again. The contemplative way of Dadirri spreads over our whole life. It renews us and brings us peace. In our Aboriginal way, we learnt to listen from our earliest days. We could not live good and useful lives unless we listened. This was the normal way for us to learn, not by asking questions. We learnt by watching and listening, waiting, and then acting. Our people have passed on this way of listening for over 40,000 years. And the time for rebirth is now. If our culture is alive and strong and respected, it will grow, it will not die, and our spirit will not die. I believe that the spirit of Dadirri we have to offer will blossom and grow, not just within ourselves, but within our whole nation. I don't know how you feel, but I am so moved by her generosity with this gift and her faith in its value. And I'm also moved by Goethe stating that his fiction is of little value compared to his scientific method of wholeness, of aliveness, yet living to see his science almost entirely ignored in favour of the science of reductionism, where understanding is sought through separating things from their context, through killing things, through dissecting their bodies. Our culture's destructive behaviours could be seen as an end result of that choice to go not down Goethe's path, but rather something more like Descartes, the scientist who said soul and body are split, and therefore body is dispensable, and we can cut up bodies, and animals don't matter, and children don't matter, and women don't matter, and people from other countries don't matter. He was a very damaged man. His mother died when he was a baby, and his other family members died, and he was shipped off. And I wasn't going to speak about it now, but in my PhD, that was really the thread that I followed, was that how trauma, not understood, pathologized, ingrained, is the foundation of our system of thinking. And if we want to undo that, we've got to get back to understanding trauma. So we've turned our back on both Indigenous wisdom and on Europe and on our own Indigenous, if we're European, our own Indigenous histories of connection to life. So any redress we may make may depend on our capacity to learn, to listen deeply, see deeply, and attune our awareness. When I first returned from my pilgrimage, I felt emotionally destabilised by my experiences with the more than human world. I was so overcome. I couldn't name the feelings. The feelings were too big and they were too strange. I had body sensations. And my brain couldn't do anything with them. So it took me a very long time. So it was 16 years ago now. I'd say it took me a full 15 years to get some language that actually matches the experience. Well, I'm hoping I've got some language. I'm hoping what I'm saying is landing for you guys. My challenge was learning how to understand through my entire organism. I was drawn to Goethean science because of how precisely the descriptions of their processes matched my spontaneous experience. It is helping me to develop techniques to balance the body's sense of numinosity with the brain's ridiculous curiosity, to engage in full body listening, using both the heart's sensory acuity, this is very good understander, and the head's cognitive accuracy. So it's confirmed my vividly felt instinct that to honour both demands a particular deportment and a specific mode of discourse, and a sense of the absolute necessity for truthfulness and for care. And Goethe writes about that thing. The student must proceed carefully when making the transitions from experience and seeing to judgment and interpretation, guarding against such dangers as impatience, precipitancy, self-satisfaction, rigidity, narrow thoughts, presumption, indolence, indiscretion, and instability. It's like, okay. But he was right. It's like, and this again, Steiner, for me, really put his finger on it. Steiner, the student of Goethe, he said, for every step in spiritual development, you need 3 steps of moral development. How to become a better person, how to become a kinder person, in order to be able to hold any sort of knowing. So why am I doing all of this? I'm quietly hopeful, well, not so quiet now, here now, that there's a bridge Goethean science could build in collaboration with Indigenous ontologies and pedagogies. There's something I've heard not infrequently over the years from Aboriginal people to the tune of, we're okay, it's you lot that need to get it together. Go and look after your mob, and where's your dreaming? These are crucial points, and they're vital for us to consider. So many people through the Western tradition have sought to Neoplatonism, Romanticism, and of course Jung and the people who've been inspired by him. I think they're all on that quest. But it's not necessarily straightforward, as probably many of you know. I know that I need to work hard to integrate this way of knowing. My cultural background is really distant from this way of being, very different. And this combines with my own trauma. We all have trauma, I have trauma. And stress and forgetting are as yet my default modes. I find I need to write my way back to grace. That writing being my method, my meditation, if you will. And if I don't, I simply don't remember. I don't remember this thing that is the core of what I love. And I waste my days in vagueness. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but if you don't do your practices, you're just lost. I must enter my awareness into the aliveness of the actual scenario, intertwining biological processes, making in every moment, cells dividing and dying, water passing through our systems, the tree and me, the breathing of air between us. If I do that, if I engage with the wondrousness of my senses, I slowly remember to see. I return to reality, as it were. And I'm astonished anew at how much we've abstracted our thinking from our bodies. So the experience I now have is similar whether I engage whether the other I engage with is another being or my own dancing or my own walking body. There is a sense of both of us, me, or if it's another being, the plant, coming into a fuller potential through our witnessing of each other. To the extent that we are separate at all, I extend the plant's experience of life. The plant enlarges mine, while at the same time partaking of the awareness of being situated in a vast field of aliveness. The encounter, the meditative encounter, brings attention to the space which always lies between, and suddenly the field of interaction adds conscious self-awareness to its ever-creative flow. So this is the sense that I have of, this brain, it's not my brain. It's the universe doing brain. And the brain is in the system. And the system is utterly inseparable from everything. Oh, the whole thing is self-aware. If I'm self-aware because I am the whole, but I'm not God, no, I don't mean that. And it's that sense of how, there it is, the whole, which is where the deportment matters. How to hold that largeness, how to be in that awe-inspiring experience, and how on earth to be useful to others. And having a strong enough body to hold that, like grounding, working through the stuff, the ego stuff that continually trips you up. So yes, there is a shadow cast by the luminous experience of feeling. I recall a story told to me by my friend Wendy, told to her by her mentor, the great late ecological theologian Thomas Berry. He felt that humans, evolving intimately from and with the exquisite beauty of this world, relied on exactly this degree of intimacy and beauty in order to bear the amount of grief that it is to be human. And with the undoing of beauty during this mechanistic era, we are unhinged with pain and ugliness, that we're made mad with grief, and we are desperate for forgetting. To think that that could be why we are all doing what we are doing, and not stopping and not being able to change. For me, after decades of grief at the state of the world, I have found some sort of peace at the end of a war with what is, because this is what is. The work itself is an answer to the pain, because it is bringing me into relationship with something so encompassing that I find, against all my expectations, deeply trusting of life. Even amid all the brokenness and dying, even sometimes because of it. The water in my body, much of it is far older than our sun. It will continue cycling through all things even after our sun has burnt through entirely. This is life, and this is what I belong to. There are scientists, bless them, who have estimated the number of all the grains of sand on all the beaches and all the deserts of the world, and have concluded that this vast number is dwarfed by the amount of stars in the universe. So, to walk from the end of one long beach to the other, to feel millions upon millions of miniature suns warm and whispering under my naked feet, and to wonder at the mystery of their lives, and to hold myself steady and clean under the water tide of wonder, this is medicine. The life system we are part of is huge, huge. Knowledge of this gives me sanity. It holds me in the fleeting beauty of this world. This cognitive awareness is paired with bodily engagement. Walking has been a companion to my process, as aesthetic response, as activism, as contemplative and spiritual practice, and as animal joy. Walking with deep feeling is entering the archetype of pilgrimage. It's a profound way to be participant with soul, with Anima Mundi. Thank you.
I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. I recommend you read this book, by the way. May I? Thank you so much. I'm a bit overcome, quite honestly. So much content, so much deep stirring stuff that I think so many of us can relate to. Such a valuable contribution, and so beautifully spoken, written, said, felt. When I said to you earlier that I felt your book was so alive because you were so present, now I know a little bit more about why I said that. And so interesting, because we're on the verge of something here. We're trembling on the brink of finding people who are going to understand how limited we've become in our perceptions and, my God, our thinking. You know, this crazy robot type brain that is just killing the rest of us. I'm sure so many of you are dying to say something, so please, I feel I should open it up to everybody else, but thank you.
I have one very stupid question. Thinking about the limits, don't we all have our limits of sacred and of pilgrimage? And you mentioned in the beginning Bhagavad Gita. I don't remember in what, and I imagine the river Ganges, which is the sacredest of the Indian rivers. All rivers are sacred, but this is particular. And that documentaries of Varanasi and so on, and the bodies of carcasses of animals are floating and people are drinking and others washing with shampoo, and people are throwing candles, flowers, and the dead bodies or the ashes of the bodies and the parts which are not burned. And the others are dipping and feeling happy, not only Hindu, but also Westerners and so on. And it is web of meaning, and it is Anima Mundi, and it is mystery, and it's devotion, archetypes, brains, whatever. My question is, can you do that? Can you go in Ganges in Varanasi and dip inside or not? Or we all, if you offer it to me, I will scream and in dread and will run away. But simple Indian woman do it and it's happy. So can you? What is your your stance on that? On this?
Is it still on?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yes, there you go. It's so interesting what you say, because when I walked the river, I swam in the river as often as I could. I'm a bit of a sook with cold water, so it wasn't every day. It was April. I did jump in Millgrove when the water was 11 degrees and I nearly died of fright. But people would say, don't you know it's polluted? You can't swim in there. It's an act of love to swim. It's an act of loyalty. It's an immersion. It's a putting your body out there to in an act of commitment. And I feel like we will clean up our river through swimming in it. Like, it's not a direct line. These things are not linear. It's an important thing to do. And our belief shapes our health. I mean, we know this. It's very clear. If you believe your river is sacred, you are actually, according to science, way less likely to get sick. Any other questions?
I think it's very interesting the way you talk about people as systems and rivers as systems and patterns. How the river is a replicating pattern, how it keeps on, even though the water pours out one end, it keeps on replenishing itself, just as human beings replenish themselves by drinking water and eating food and excreting it and so on. And in that sense, how the individual and the river is are the same. And I thought it was also very interesting the way you were talking about the patterns of the mind, and the as you were no doubt referring to Jung's description of the archetype as being like a mountain, or mountains and hills and rivers, where the flows of thought sort of tend to flow down the valleys, if you like, of the mind and the unconscious, and whether the Aboriginals' minds over 60,000 years became sort of took on some of the pattern of the topography.
What a beautiful, beautiful question. It's actually, for me, the feeling in that question is very similar to my quest of understanding this kind of work. To answer it properly is, I have to go into such a deep place in myself. I'm not even sure I can find it, because it's so strange and it's so real. Forgive me, but the way I would like to answer it is that humans, we've been around for a few 100,000 years, they say. It's hard to know, maybe 1 million years. We've been evolving for a very long time together. The human organism is a very long, slow, co-creative shaping. It is an act. The human is an act of the earth. Every single aspect of us has been made by life. So I'm not saying like God, yes, God made us, but God is the evolutionary process itself. The billions of years of life shaping itself. So for hundreds of thousands of years, there has been a primate with this growing neocortex looking at the river and watching its flow and seeing what it does. All the way through, we are made by the river and by the mountain and by the cloud and by the land, which has made our gate, by the tree, which has made the reach of our arm, by every single thing we have been made. You could say it goes back 10,000 years, the journey of agriculture and city and colonisation, the creation of the modern human, who then came and met with and encountered people who were living a hunter-gatherer life that had been only a few thousand years before. Every single person on the planet was a hunter-gatherer. So for 99.99% of human history, we have all been hunter-gatherers. It is a mere blink of the eye that we have not been like that. To me, we are much, much more alike than modernity and the narratives we've got going in our culture would suggest. And to me, that's very important and that's very political, to actually align ourselves all as animals together, as wildness together, as people together, as minds together. So, and that is why it is so important to listen to people like Miriam Rose, because the purity and clarity of her message there, I don't know if anyone else felt it, but to me, reading it again was just, wow, that is so good. That is so good. And so yes, they've got a head start in that depth of perception, but we can all go back. We can all retrain ourselves to be that aware, that alive, that wild, that embodied, that kind, that wise, and still be the people that we are, living in a society that has to dramatically change shape dramatically over the next few generations, or we are all done for. The scale of the problem is matched by the depth of the solutions that people like Miriam Rose and Goethe and Goethean scientists now are offering. I do believe that. I actually believe, I do have hope in the capacity of us to take these technologies with, the ones through the European history, fusing them with the ones of this place and with all those things that Goethe spoke about. There's a long list of things that we have to be aware of, to be humble enough, to be kind enough, to be patient enough in the time where there's no time. We have to be all those things. There's no other way, I think. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant. There's a question there, I think.
Nostalgia that I think, I'm calling it that for want of a better word, that deeper response that people do feel close to nature, and I'm likening it to like a feeling of nostalgia, even though you don't quite remember. It's sort of there. So I did warn Maya that some people had to catch trains and things, so I don't want to hog the floor. Does anybody else? Yeah.
I really would speak to that nostalgia. It's not that far away from us. And it's very important that we don't keep punishing ourselves for the dreadful things that have happened here, because dreadful things happened in Europe. And we are the bearers of that trauma. We inflicted the trauma here. We've got to forgive very deeply so that we can access this thing that is very, very close. Feelings are meant to be felt, worked through, and then we go to the next stage. Those of you who are therapists know that. And we've got to therapize our society. We've got to reconcile with our own history, with Indigenous people. And that is a process and a project. It's a creative act, and we've got to get on with it. Sorry. Yeah.
This is just an idea. There's a tram that goes around Melbourne, and it's advertising that planet Saturn is raining diamonds. Now, if other planets are raining other elements, could the whole universe be just mirroring? So we think that it's huge, but it could be just a reflection going on throughout the whole of the universe. Just an idea.
We can always talk afterwards, and I can sign books. Some people like that. John has a question, is that right?
Yes, the Aborigines seem to have their creative spirit, their creative energy in the form of the crow, which is a very real symbol, and yet Christianity for quite some time is working with a Heavenly Father as a creator who no one can see, is invisible. And aren't we a bit stupid by not being a bit more concrete about the way we are prepared to view the universe?
I couldn't agree more. I agree. It's all creator. That's what I was trying to say in that idea of the co-creation. It's all made and making. The whole lot of it. It's all sacred. It's all got to be cared for. James here has a question.
Thank you, Maya. It's always a delight to hear Cartesian dualism demolished, and I think you did a good job of that tonight. My question is about a dualism, though, and that is the dualism between being in the pattern, recognizing the pattern, and that infinite interconnectedness of feeling part of the whole, and how you reached that point on your pilgrimage. Was it when you were sleeping by the river? Was it the memories in the water that drew that leap, that transcendent leap across the dualism? Or was it the movement of your body and walking that was stimulating subcortical processes that helped you integrate? Or do you have symptoms or indications of what might have triggered that leap from the pattern to the whole?
Isn't that a delicious question? Thank you. Craig Sandrock, who is a Jungian that some of you here may know, once said to me, things don't go past, it's not just, time is not linear. So it was because it was a body experience. It was the chant. It was, and I write about this. I write about all this stuff in the book of da, 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 da. 8 hours a day for 21 days with me and my 3 friends. We were in training into a really deep music. And our bodies know that music. And we need it because the altered state of that type of entrainment, that depth of perception, is very energy saving. So if you are a hunter-gatherer and you have to run after the herd of gazelles for 3 days, you can do that if you're entrained with the group and you're saving energy by being so, the mind quietened, you're off. You're in the flow, you're in the zone, it's in the flow. It's a flow state. So yes, all of those things, the sleeping by, but also the weird thing is, I opened my front door, and I write about this, I step out onto the welcome mat, and I was going to get the train down to Williamstown to start there, to go off. It started as soon as I left the door, like I felt something. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm inside something. And this field of magic aliveness stepped up around me. there were certainly peaks, absolutely, and it was often to do with water. It was often to do with the light over the water. And the experience that I had when I did the research on Wurundjeri mythology, so the deepest experience was the shaft of light of the setting sun. And when there's the merest fragments of the traditions of the Wurundjeri. There is so little language left. But there is recorded the story of how when the soul dies, they travel the shaft of light that leads to the setting sun. Their soul travels that and they go into the world, into the next world. Somehow the name of that is Karalk. The name of that shaft of light is Karalk. There's a word for it. There were only way less than 1,000 words preserved. One of those words is that. There's really, really deep patterns here. A deep spiritual richness that is, it's something that I certainly can't live every day. I can't, it's too much, but it's beautiful to visit. So the experience was there for the whole thing, and then when I got to the end, to the source, when I was, from the bay and the beach and the city to a river this wide, and filled and drank from the water there, and looked back over the quest and the sense that this is ancient cultural land, and I'm joining for the first time in my life, I am joining an ancient cultural pattern. I mean, that is the hinge moment of my life. Everything leads towards it and everything leads back to it. The centre.
Hello? Oh, okay. He adjusted it. Okay, thanks, John. I think we might have to draw this to a close, but oh gosh, what a talk. Thank you for all that amazing content. Yes, your body went through a certain experience, but it took you a long time to catch up with it. I think that's part of it. I go and sit near a tree every morning, and to me it's giving patience to the world, and I'm so grateful, the patience of trees, my goodness me.
Could I finish by just showing you a few photos of near where I live, which is very beautiful. I live in Warburton now, but where I'm taking anyone who goes on Sunday, it's just as beautiful. It's in the middle of the city, and it is a wonderland because people have, because of the tending of Aboriginal people for tens of thousands of years, but also that whiteys have learned to bring the bush back and have been working very, very hard. It's a very, very beautiful part of the inner city, and we're going to walk there on Sunday. So anyone who's on the fence, please come. It'd be lovely to have you. But I live in Warburton, and I live at the base of this mountain, and we call them the mist dragons. They are pulled by climatic conditions from the east to the west. They follow the river, and sometimes they're just above the river, sometimes they snake along the side of the mountain, and they're fast and they just slip down along the mountain, the mist dragons. And I live just there. And, see that tree? See that big tree on Mount Bride? I visited that tree. It's like, I really want to find that tree. We found that tree. It was wonderful. We found it because we left really late in the day, and we found it because you looked up, and how can you tell how tall a tree is from inside the forest? It was the only one with golden light in the top. It was brilliant. We left it ridiculously late hour. The river's been very high lately. It's been really fun. That's the bridge near the bottom of my garden. And I write about that bridge a lot in my next books, which are not published yet because I'm still sort of sitting on them, still trying to work out what I've done. But that bridge is a very big learning. This is the forest on Mount Donabuang, and that was the forest that we walked through as we journeyed to the source. And yes, we had times like that as we walked to the source, the light shining. And that's the river in snow. That's the path in snow, because often it would be in snow. That's Mount Donabuang. Thank you.